And so having the horse there and being outside in nature is like it's two special dynamics there that sometimes can help people to really open up. So what I'm looking for then when I'm working with the client is the reaction of the horse to the client, but also the client's reaction to the horse, because that can kind of often give you a guide to where they are at emotionally.
So welcome everybody to the Good Enough Counsellors podcast, and today I am really excited to welcome Alex Gulland, who actually lives not too far away from me but has a very special role because she works on a farm as an equine therapist. And so I'm really thrilled to have Alex here today, and she's going to tell us a little bit about her role and how she works. And also I'm going to ask her if she's happy to tell us a little bit about her as well and how she ended up doing this sort of work. So welcome, Alex.
Hi there, it's good to meet you, see you, hear you.
After all these emails that we've messaging that we've been doing backwards and forwards. So Alex, I hope you don't mind me saying, but one of the things that you do is you are actually a filmmaker as well. And I didn't mention that in the introduction.
Yeah.
And actually, your films, they're doing quite well, aren't they? So would you like to tell us a little bit about the films that you've done recently?
Yes, so the documentary side really was born out of the lockdown.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if you can cast your mind back to that period of time.
How can we forget?
I've always filmed. I worked in advertising originally, and I set up my own little corporate filming company in 2010. Mm-hmm. I say little, but we were little but mighty. We worked for some quite big brands. Yeah. But that involved making films for other people, really, and telling their story. Yeah. And at the start of the lockdown, I'd always really wanted to do documentaries that I wanted to make. And I'd also had this fascination with mental health and exploring it. So it was the start of the lockdown where I started making my first one-woman documentary, which looked at the documentary from 4 different viewpoints, 4 different people experiencing it very, very differently. So it kind of looked at the nation's state of their mental health. Yeah. And then that did really well. It kind of travelled the world on the International Film Festival. Mm-hmm. And then from there, I just carried on doing more filming, and then when the Ukraine invasion happened, I just felt I had to do something else. That was my dog just shaking there, you can hear in the background. But I wanted to really do something around Ukraine and the effect that the war would have on the really innocent victims, the animals, the wildlife, the pets. Yeah. And that kind of unfolded into I think it's at the moment the actual documentary runs at about 50 minutes, 50, and it looks at how the charities who go out there to help the animals and the wildlife, how they're helping people through their animals. And that's how IFOR, who are one of the charities that I hooked up with, that's how they explain what they do, because they were helping people get over the border with their animals when they were getting out of Ukraine. Yeah. But they were also looking at trying to preserve the wildlife while Ukraine is under attack. Yeah. And then also just people that are still there, because there was a huge panic when the initial invasion was announced, and a lot of people just let their animals go. One woman just let her horses go in the forest, thinking they would have a better chance. So it really focuses on that. It is very emotional, but I just felt it was a story that had to be told. Really.
But maybe a side that we don't think about a lot of the time, and it's just so terrible to sort of think about, but people have to do such desperate things, just letting them go.
And I think as well, I kind of thought, well, what would I do with my pets, with my animals, how would that affect me if I suddenly had to leave my
Yeah.
home? Could really put, when I was talking to the refugees and also a Ukrainian filmmaker, you've really kind of got to put yourself in their shoes. Yeah, there's a lot of empathy. I think if I hadn't have had my counselling training while I was doing that, I probably would have got into trouble.
Yeah.
Because there were a lot of emotional stories.
Yeah, I bet. Because it's really interesting, I thought, when you said that the charity was helping people through their pets.
Yeah.
And I thought that's got a real connection with the work that you do in your equine therapy, hasn't it? Is that whole thing about helping people through animals. It's sort of like a real theme, isn't it, for you?
Yes. Well, when I discovered that I could actually train to help people via horses, I just thought it was the most amazing thing ever.
So can you tell us a bit more about how that sort of came about? So did you do like a sort of traditional therapy course, or was your entry into therapy through the equine therapy? Tell us a bit more about your journey and how you've ended up as an equine therapist.
So I initially trained to be an equine therapist in 2017, and it coincided with moving out of London to Essex.
Yeah.
And I did the training. It's like entry-level training, really. It's more, they train you to work with the horses, which I kind of, I could do, but you're looking at the horses in a different perspective, really.
Right. Yeah.
But it gives you a certain amount of skill set in dealing with people with everyday problems.
Yeah.
And what I was finding when I started off was that there were a lot of kind of mental health issues that I couldn't really, like, deep trauma, various other, really common mental health illnesses that I really couldn't do enough for. I could do a certain amount, but I could only really do it in the present, as it were. So I couldn't kind of like go back into their past.
Yeah.
And so that kind of gave me the bug then to learn more. And again, as lockdown, I think lockdown was, such a incredibly creative time for some people in terms of learning and pivoting into different careers.
Yeah.
That really got me into thinking about doing something more in the mental health arena. So learning more about, how we can actually help people, how I could strengthen my boundaries. I had no idea how many modalities were out there. I just thought therapy came in a box, and that was it. Then maybe
you just learned therapy, and
that was it.
Yeah.
I knew that there was things like CBT, but I didn't realize all the different kind of psychodynamic and humanistic. But that's so really kind of like the learning and the working with the horses and seeing the effect that the horses and the ponies had on my clients made me want to do more, to open that door into the never-ending learning now, because there's always something else to learn about, isn't there? It doesn't stop.
No, that's it. And almost every time you have a client with a different presentation, you're sort of back reading up again and learning more. So it was sort of like you got into equine therapy, and then as a result of doing that, you wanted to dig deeper into, should we say, traditional therapy techniques. And so you did it sort of that way. But now you combine it all together, don't you? And could you tell us a bit more about what you do? And because I know it's you work with various different people, don't you? Could you tell us a bit more about what the work involves?
So the work itself. So what you're working with when you're working with the horses is you're working with the horse's energy, and horses are really great to work with us on this level because they're so sensitive. So they are known as prey animals, and in the wild, they're not preyed upon, they are prey animals. And all they really want is to be with the herd and eat grass. But what makes them survive in the wild is this sensitivity and this kind of like a circle of energy which is around them. So if you see a herd of wild horses, you'll see that the ripple of energy that goes through the herd if there is any kind of alert, if there's a predator. And they then kind of take, they take that and they move on that. If there's danger, they'll all move together. So they read each other's energy very, very, very well. That's how they communicate. With us, they're trying to tune in with our energy and also with our adrenaline, and trying to attune themselves to our heartbeat as well. So that's really what you're working with when you're working with a pony or a horse and a client. And really, the therapy itself is really good for people that don't want to sit in a room and do therapy. So, I mean, some people, that's great for some people, but other people do want to get out and move around. And so having the horse there and being outside in nature is like it's two special dynamics there that sometimes can help people to really open up. So what I'm looking for then when I'm working with the client is the reaction of the horse to the client, but also the client's reaction to the horse, because that can kind of often give you a guide to where they are at emotionally.
Yeah. Fascinating. So what sort of problems would people bring to equine therapy? Is it just like any other counselling where it's a whole range of problems, or are there particular types of things that people would maybe bring to equine therapy?
It's the same with it being in the counselling room, really. So it's anything, really. Anxiety, depression, all the common mental health problems. It's quite good in the sense that it's really tuning into the right hand side of our brain, so that the chatter that we get in the left hand side of our brain when we're outside and we're with a horse, that tends to slow down a bit, and the right hand side of the brain, which is more about creativity, and it's all about nature, it's all about connectivity with what's going on around you. It's more about the body language than it would be if you're sitting in a therapy room.
It gets people probably out of their heads almost and into their bodies.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
Exactly that. So they're more aware of what they're putting out there. So it can be particularly good if people are lacking in confidence, or if they're looking for leadership training of any sort.
Oh, really? Yeah.
But also just, if they just want to kind of like share an issue or a problem, having the horse there is often the icebreaker, because they've found a lot of the time that new clients will talk to the horse.
Wow.
And
Tell the horse what's going on.
Yeah, and that is really great in a way, because it's helping them to open up in a very, very different way. So there's like a third dynamic that comes into it. So to answer your question, it's the same as we would approach any kind of common mental health illness as counsellors. That's what I work with, but I work outside or in a stable or in a school, in a menage.
So if it's raining, are you in the stable? Is that when you're in the stable?
Yeah. We adapt. So we can work in the stable. We can do things like reflective grooming, getting the client to kind of align themselves with the horse's breathing while they're grooming.
That must be very calming, I should think, because that sort of act, that repetition of sort of grooming, and then there must be something about being with a living animal and just touching a living animal and the warmth of the animal. It's very sort of embodied in a sense, isn't it?
Yeah. So just having that connection can really kind of calm them. And then also as well, we do things like horse painting, which is, and again, that kind of crosses over into a little bit of art therapy. We get them to select symbols. So we have like a big range of different symbols that they can choose from, which are on cards. So this could be runic symbols, it could be Native American symbols, and it's really kind of getting them to say, well, what's kind of in the past for you, what's happening for you now, and what's happening in the future. This is normally an exercise we do towards the end of a series of sessions, and they actually get to paint those symbols onto the horse. And again, that's something which is quite, it's very relaxing,
Sounds
But
amazing.
a lot of people really tune into that. So you're not covering, the entire horse in paint. It's just
Yeah.
normally 2 or 3 symbols. But that works really well as kind of like an expression. So we have to adapt, obviously,
Yeah. So,
to the weather.
yeah. I was going to say, how do the horses react to being painted on? I mean, do you have to have particular types of horses that work with people? Are they very sort of like calm horses, or how does that work?
I think if some horses are very highly strung and some horses are traumatized. So for them, it's probably not the right way to go, really, as a
Yeah.
therapy horse. I mean, they
Yeah.
probably would get there eventually. You want a horse that is relatively calm,
Yeah.
but then you want them to also be switched on. So it's like a combination of both things. So, and they tend to then react, different horses will react differently to different people. But
Oh, wow. Yeah.
it's I'm lucky where I work is there's the wide selection of horses and ponies to work
Yeah.
with. So some of them are more sensitive than others, some of them are cheekier than others. So
Amazing.
it's
So, how do you go about choosing a horse then? So, would you sort of like, sort of maybe try a fairly reliable horse for a first session and then maybe choose a different horse for another session, or how does it work?
there are kind of for the first sessions there are kind of like some go-to ponies that I know are fairly reliable. And at the moment, we've got some foals up at the farm who were adopted, and they're particularly good with, for children, because we're trying to actually get them acclimatized to being handled by humans as well. But yeah, there are certain horses which I kind of will be my go-to.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not any horse can do it. As I say, if a
Yeah.
horse is being traumatized, it's obviously, they're not used to, they are like humans, they're hypervigilant.
Yeah.
So
So,
they're not going to react in a really congruent way. What you
yeah.
want
Yeah.
is the congruence from the horse to help the client
Yeah.
become congruent themselves, really.
Yeah. And it's a bit like, say, people using therapy dogs, isn't it? That some dogs are suitable to be therapy dogs and others aren't.
Yeah,
My little
yeah,
Boo would definitely have not been a therapy dog, but
yes,
other dogs are calm and
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It's really interesting. So, how do the horses respond to the clients then?
the horses respond in a variety of different ways, really, dependent on what the client's kind of giving out. So when I first started, I had a lady that came to see me who was quite a well-known lifestyle coach, and she used to kind of present in front of like 200, 300 people at a time. And I invited her up to see one of the horses that I was working with, just to explain to her how I worked, and because she was interested in it. And her energy was really big. You can
Yeah,
imagine, somebody that can hold a room full
an audience.
of people, an audience. They kind of know how to talk, how to hold themselves, and they have a presence about themselves. And so she kind of listened to what I was saying about the horse. One of the things that I really kind of make a point of saying is making people aware of how they approach the horse or the pony, because a lot of people will just go straight up to a horse or a pony and kind of like give it a good old slap on the
Pat.
neck. And you've got to appreciate that they're checking you out as much as you're checking them out. So
Yeah,
you
yeah,
approach them with respect, and you're stepping into their energy space, so they've got time to check you out, so that
yeah.
they can feel comfortable with you. So that's something that I'd already explained to her, that I do something called a body scan, checking in with your body, so that kind
Yeah,
of how you're breathing and what's going on with yourself, and if your heart's beating fast, but just kind of a general kind of check in with yourself. And she got all of that, but she said to me, I'll just go in the paddock. We were just about to kind of finish the introductions off, and she just wanted to go in with the paddock, and she said, I wonder if I can get him to follow me. And I thought, well, yeah, okay. And she went in, and of course, because there was no connection there, she was the most dominant person within that paddock. There was no reason for the horse to be drawn to her. She wasn't a threat to him, but he wasn't particularly interested in her. He didn't know that she could stand on a stage, and she was quite well known. And so there was no connection there at all. So she was unable to make him follow her. And I think in that respect, it's you've got to kind of like work on what that connection is, and you've got to work out what you want to get out of that session. So for her, it was all about making the horse do what she wanted him to do. So it's a very dominant thing, rather than watching the horse, observing what the horse is doing, and then moving forward from there, which is kind of like what we do on the therapy side. I don't know if that's answered your question.
It's really,
so the horse
really
in that sense, in terms of the reaction, was a bit nonchalant. It was kind of like, well, I'm not I'm not really bothered
so
by you. so there you are. So so their reaction, what you're looking for is a typical horse reaction from them, which you can then work with. But you have to work towards that, and you have to do a little bit of work on yourself, and you have to do a little bit of work with the horse before you can get that connection with them.
It's interesting. So, because one of the things that's coming up for me is sort of what it would feel like, especially sort of like maybe in a first session, because I guess it takes, I don't know. I mean, because I think for me, it would take an awful lot of confidence, which maybe I don't feel, to actually go in and be with a horse. And I think what it might, I'm just sort of imagining what it might be like for me. And I can imagine for me, it might almost bring up that sort of performative element, that part of me that thinks I've got to do things right. And I guess that, it's almost sort of like, it feels like quite vulnerable. I mean, is that how people experience it? Do people perhaps feel vulnerable? Or is it almost like, the people that you get might be, well, I know I love horses, I really want to work this way, or I just wonder sort of what maybe reactions you get.
It's a combination of differences. So there are some people who are horsey people will come in and want to dominate because they feel, that's they're comfortable with horses, and horses should do as they're told in terms of their world. So often in terms of the therapy with somebody like that who comes from a horsey world where it's a lot of riding, it's not necessarily, doesn't necessarily work, because they've kind of, unless they can do like a complete paradigm shift of how they view the horse itself, I suppose it's dependent on the issue that the client is trying to resolve. So if there is a fear of being vulnerable, or if there is an issue that somebody has with their self-confidence, or they are suffering from anxiety, then we work with the horse in a way that helps that person with that particular issue. So, if you wanted to do something, if you wanted to come and like work on anxiety or whatever, I would probably suggest that we do some reflective grooming to start with, to allow you to get close to the horse, to relax, to kind of get in tune with the horse. So some people who haven't had an experience with a horse before, obviously you've got to bring them in slowly and make sure that they're comfortable with it, and it's working as therapy for them. So then they're not sitting in their fight or flight zone. They're actually kind of the anxiety is at a level which is a normal pace for them.
Fantastic. That's really interesting. So it works for all sorts. I think that's what you're saying.
And it's like no one client is ever the same, are they, when we're working with them? And it's the same when you bring them to the horses, and it has to, they have to be comfortable in that setting. So they have to try in a way to learn their own anchors, and that's something that we do in the first session. I sit down with them and I get them to draw what their anchors are. So that's almost in a circle. We get all the the different colour pens out, and they get to draw kind of like where they go in their head when they're feeling happy. What are their safe places? What are their safe songs? What are the, all the things that kind of relax them, and all of that is always kind of front of mind with them when they're with the horse, so that they've kind of got almost like their first aid book for anchors, as it were, to ground themselves. Yeah, so in the first session we get a little bit of art therapy going. So we get them to draw their anchors, and this gets them to really focus on elements in their life that they can draw on, not just when they're in the sessions with me, but when they're living their life away from me. That's all about kind of really helping them to regulate themselves.
Yeah,
because we know a lot of it is about allowing our client to learn to kind of get that regulation going, and to get the healthy co-regulation going as well.
And then, I mean, I've watched the video of you at the farm working with people, but I've had the benefit of that and other people haven't. So tell us a bit more, so people aren't riding the horses, are they? And what's where are you in relation to the client and the horse?
It's all ground-based, so there's no riding that takes place. It's all work on the ground, so that you're directly connecting with the horse. So I'm either observing or I'm there with them.
Yeah.
So obviously, if we're in a stable, we're in the stable together. If we're out in the school, there could be occasion where I do ask the client, if the client is feeling in a safe place, I ask the client to go in to the school with a horse, but I'm always there observing. So I'm in the role of watching, and then kind of encouraging them to open up and talk.
Yeah. Because I mean, when you first started, so were you involved with horses as a rider before you started equine therapy, or was it that you got involved in horses in another way?
I always had a connection with horses growing up, so I loved being around them. I think it's because I could look at their faces, and they looked very knowing and wise, and I was quite an anxious child. So when you're in that non-judgmental environment with a horse, or with another animal, you kind of learn to relax. So I was a rider, but once I started working on the ground, I actually got more out of it, and I think that was in the sense that there became more of a purpose to it. That once you start doing the equine therapy training, that you kind of, there is a purpose to why you're doing certain exercises with the horse. And so now working on the ground to me is preferable, being closer to them on the ground rather than sitting on them. Also, I don't bounce quite as easily as I used to when I was younger, so I'm slightly more wary of a fall might take slightly longer to recover from.
It's sort of like a different relationship with horses now. I think that's what you're saying, isn't it?
It's I think when you're a rider, it's more about making the horse do what you want it to do for you, whereas when you're working on the therapy side, it's you actually really want the horse to be a horse.
You're working alongside them, aren't you? It's really interesting. So, like you say, this third party in the therapy who's an animal, which is amazing.
I mean, some people can work with 3 or 4 horses at a time.
No. That's really blown my mind now.
I was just watching earlier, there's a little training thing I'm on at the moment with the Polyvagal Equine Institute in the US, and what they do with their family systems training is they put 3 or 4 horses into an arena, and then the family observe from there, and the family then kind of they get them to identify with one of the horses. So they're kind of doing it from that point of view. So they do eventually kind of like go in to the arena themselves with the horses, but the observation is there initially.
I'm just thinking, I can imagine in a family where someone says, well, that's my horse, and someone else saying, no, that's the one I want.
Yeah, and that whole, that starts a discussion of its own,
Yeah,
doesn't it? Really, in terms of
yeah.
what they're identifying with within that horse, and it really gives you an insight into really what their perception is of themselves.
So I'm really curious, how easy is it to get sort of paying clients for equine therapy? Is it a difficult thing to market, or, is it just sort of like word of mouth? I mean, because I know the farm does quite a lot, doesn't it? How does it work in terms of getting clients?
I can't really, because I haven't done anything else like it, I can't really compare it.
Compare,
I
yeah.
found it,
Tell us how
I
you
find
get
it
clients.
difficult to start with, because a lot of people, I'd call up schools or potential places where I thought I could get clients, and they just couldn't get their head round what it was.
Yeah.
But it took a couple of, there was a guy that worked at one of the local pupil referral units.
Yeah.
And he had a friend that was doing it with a herd of horses, who was up in Dorset.
Yeah, so he sort of...
And so he got it. So you just need a couple of early adopters, really, that can come in, and then you interview them, and they then become your case histories.
Yeah.
But it's difficult because you've got to, you're going out there doing something which is quite, difficult for people to get their heads around. And they then go, oh, it's riding for the disabled. It's like, well, no, it's actually, it's not that. It's
not at all.
It's kind of like come out of, that really, that's what it was born out of, but it goes slightly deeper. So it's quite difficult to start with, but then the more people, discovered it, and it was mainly young people that were being brought to me with specific issues and problems that I started working with.
And has the word spread now? Because I know I mean, obviously you got in touch with me anyway, but then shortly afterwards I saw there was something in the paper about the farm and the work you were doing. Did that help to generate more people being in touch?
Yeah. I mean, we're getting there slowly in terms of clients, young people, and adults as well. So it's like any kind of counselling business, is that you start with one or two. We're getting groups coming to us now as well, which is really good. We had a well-being day just before Christmas, and we're planning on doing some more of those. I think,
and that must be a good way in as well. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, I think because the location is really, really lovely, and all the animals are super friendly. It kind of lends itself to well-being days, to groups, schools. So it's growing at quite a nice pace. I don't think you want it to grow too quickly, because it can kind of get out of control a little bit. So gradually we're managing to attract the right attention. And our little therapy pony, who's called Secret, she met the mayor the other day in Southend on one of her visits. So he's coming out for a site visit on the 11th of April. So it's gradually, people are kind of learning about it.
Yeah, the word is spreading. And is it I mean, what I was thinking is there's quite a lot of things like forest schools and those sorts of experiences for kids who maybe are neurodivergent. Are those sort of people who might be attracted to coming to you as well? Yes,
and they do, up at the farm, they do send days. Neurodiverse, it's great, all the different groups that come to us. I think anybody that's got a mental health issue or problem, it's great for that, but also physical disabilities as well, it's good for that too. So it's a wide variety of people that come to us. My side of it at the moment is a bit more one-on-one than group, but then I can do room-based counselling if needs be as well. So it's kind of, it's growing at a steady rate.
Yeah. And do you do all these sort of normal, like advertising saying counselling directory? Do you ever get anybody who would read that you're an equine therapist and get hold of you in that sort of way? Or perhaps you don't do that, I don't know.
Yeah. So one of the clients that I've got she's a long-term client, but she doesn't do equine therapy with me, but the reason that she was attracted to working with me online was because I did work with horses. So I think people see it and they kind of look at it and think, oh, that looks interesting. I might just look a bit further. So all the registered with the BACP and all the other kind of places that we have to be. I'm in all those places as a mental health counsellor and an equine therapist as well.
And people maybe look at it and think, oh, an equine therapist, and that sort of like, in a sense, gives people a message about the sort of person you are. I suppose, the way it comes across to me is that very sort of centred and grounded place that being with animals brings you, and maybe that's something that people might be seeking out in a therapist. Sort of, in a way, people might like working with someone who's done, say, yoga teaching or something like that. There's sort of like a message almost that it portrays about the type of person that you might be.
I suppose to use it's horses for courses, isn't it? I think you kind of, you choose your counsellor or your therapist from how they present themselves to you. So it is, if those people are uncomfortable in a counselling room and have to be outside for whatever reason, as I said earlier, it kind of works really well for them.
Have you got any sort of stories of transformations or anything that's happened as a result of people using horses in their therapy that you can tell me about, that's not breaking confidentiality, obviously?
Well, so there's one story which I've mentioned in other interviews that I've given, which is it's actually by a gentleman that works in the US, who is a doctor. So he's a guy called Alan J. Hamilton, and his book is Zen Mind, Zen Horse. He was a neurosurgeon, and when he retired, he set up a ranch, and it was a ranch. He was using it for therapy, but also he was using it for a variety of different reasons, mainly because he just loved horses. And he was working one day with a client that in his book he calls Lillian. It's in the introduction to his book. And she'd come to him because she was suffering from cancer. She had brain cancer, and she'd been told she literally had months to live. But she was quite insistent that she work with one of the stallions there, a stallion called Romeo. And he was thinking that she maybe had a death wish because he was in the height of the mating season, and he was full of testosterone, not the doctor, but for the horse. And so first of all, he kind of thought, well, she was very weak from all the different treatments that she'd had, so he really had to think about it. But she was so determined that this is what she wanted to do. So he went to get Romeo, and he put Romeo into something called a round pen, which is what it says on the tin. It's a round pen where you kind of it's got quite a lot of space in it, but it's round. Yeah. And the horse went in there, and Lillian went in there, and as she walked in, I mean, he could see that she was weakened from the treatment, but she gently kind of like walked into the centre of the round pen and just stood there. And meanwhile, Romeo's whizzing around the outside of the round pen, looking splendid and amazing. This big 17-hound.
Prancing around,
prancing around. Look at me. And she closed her eyes, and she stood, and she just breathed. She was just breathing. He could see that she was breathing deeply. Eventually she opened her eyes, and eventually Romeo stopped and came over and stood next to her.
Wow.
And she turned around, and he was completely calm at that point. And she put her arms around the horse's neck, and Dr. Hamilton could see that she was crying. And she came out of the round pen, and she went up to Dr. Hamilton and said, I had to do that because I had to kind of get the strength to calm him, because that's what I'm going to have to harness for the next couple of months to get through the really aggressive treatment that they were going to give her. She said she knew that if she could calm that horse, of that, that amount of energy. She could calm that. She could get through what she was, up against. And she did. She lasted for another year. So they expected her to last for a couple of months.
Yeah.
But she lived for another year. And some of her ashes are actually in that round pen.
Wow.
She asked for them to be scattered there. But I think that was kind of, that really worked in a very powerful way, that she was learning how to harness her own energy, but also to be able to calm the horse as well. So it was a really amazing test for her to show what she could do with her own energetic power, really. So it's something that, as I say, is in the introduction of his book, which is amazing. It's full of stories like that, but that was the one that really touched me.
Yeah, just that finding her own power, in a sense.
Yeah. But in terms of how I've experienced it, I think it's more, for me, I've seen horses really help people who've been really, really broken, to give them confidence.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Again, that's sort of personal power, in a sense.
Yes, and the confidence building, but also, I suppose you would put it in that class of conditions of worth, really, to make them more congruent and more aware of what's going on around them. But also, they've got that really positive visualization to then take with them when they are in those environments that they are feeling anxious. They can kind of look back on that and really appreciate what they've achieved.
That's it, because it's not just talking about it, it's actually doing it, isn't it?
Yeah.
And they're actually doing it in the session.
Yeah, it's very experiential.
Yeah. How interesting. The other thing which I think I really need to ask you before we finish is, I'm sure people will be thinking to themselves, I'm sure there'll be some people listening to this thinking, oh, how could I train as an equine therapist? So was it a course that you did in the UK, or was it something that's offered in the US? How did you go about training to do equine therapy?
There's a couple of different places you can train in the UK. The company that I trained with is an organisation called LEAP, LEAP. And they've been going for a good number of years now. I think it's probably 10, 15 years. So they train both psychotherapists, but also people that don't have any mental health training as well, so on different levels. And they've got places kind of like all over the UK. So that's who I trained with. But there are obviously other organisations. There are organisations in the States as well. But yeah, it's you have to. The course itself is, for me, it was about a year long, and you have to do a series of obviously case histories and various other things to qualify.
So you need access to horses.
You need access to horses, but you if there is somebody local to you that has horses and wants them socialized, and in return for mucking out or whatever, you can work with them, because there are a lot of people out there that have horses that are retired and they're looking for uses for them, or they just want their horses to have that extra connection with people. It's a very nice job for a horse, because as I say, all they have to do is be a horse.
They don't have anybody sitting on them or anything like that. Fantastic. Oh, Alex, it's been absolutely fascinating. Really, really interesting to hear about your work. It just sounds amazing. And I'll make sure that your details are in the show notes as well. So
thank you, Josephine. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
It's been lovely. Thank you so much for being here. And I think people will be reading the book as well. So
yes. So that's just one book. There's loads of other recommendations of books I could give you if you want.
Well, if I put my your details in the show notes, and then perhaps people can get in touch directly.
That'd be lovely. Really lovely. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. Do come and join my Facebook community, Good Enough Counsellors. And for more information about how I can help you develop your private practice, please visit my website, josephinehughes.com. If you found this episode helpful, I'd love it if you could share it with a fellow therapist, or leave a review on your podcast app. And in closing, I'd love to remind you that every single step you make gets you closer to your dream. I really believe you can do it.